Good evening, parents and students. I could see that several, names are quite familiar. Thank you for coming to tonight's seminar about VCE English. I'm very delighted to introduce Miss Wright to all our students and parents tonight. Miss Wright is the academic manager and VCE English coordinator at Topscope College. She has been teaching secondary English around 10 years. I believe that most of our students knew Miss Wright or have attended her English classes. She is an excellent VCE English teacher and teaching Year 12 English and Year 11 English language at Topscope College. She possesses a unique combination of knowledge, passion, and teaching skills that inspire and empower their students. All of her Year 12 students this year have received A or A+ in SAC results from their schools. Last year, 30% of our students have received raw score 40+ in their English subjects. Let us find out the secrets from Miss Wright, how to reach the high standards in VCE English SACs and final exams. Thank you. Your turn now.
All right, lovely. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining in. I can see some familiar names and faces. I think a couple of you may be getting flashbacks to remote learning because this is reminds me of seeing your names, and again, is actually really nice. So yeah, so tonight I'm going to be going through a couple of things. So I've got a presentation that I would like to share with everyone. I might just need screen sharing if that's okay. Just quickly, Olivia, that would be awesome. But yeah, so as Olivia gave me a very generous introduction. So I'm currently teaching VCE English at Topscope. I teach around, I think at the moment it's around 6 to 8 students in smaller groups and at varying levels, and they've all done really well, actually. So it's been a real gift being able to help them through this year. So if you just give me a moment, I'm going to be going through tonight some strategies that I would suggest, and also just some things that are really important for current, not so much junior and middle school students to kind of be aware of going into middle and senior, because there are quite a few changes to the study design. So if you just give me a second, let me know if you can't, let me know if this looks all good. It should be okay. Okay. So today, welcome. I'm sure that a lot of you, or pretty much all of you, are kind of interested in knowing how you can get used to bolstering your English performance pretty early. Some of you I know are probably from, I'm not sure how young exactly we're joining, but I'm imagining you're all junior to middle high school. So I think I applaud you for your motivation. I think that's amazing. So English really is one of those things. I tell my students always, you can't rush it right at the end. And to make it much easier for you, the earlier you start, the better. And I'm sure that all of you guys know that, and that's why you're here. So today, in terms of an overview of what I'm going to go through. So I'm going to look through some changes to the study design. So that's a really big one. If you don't know what a study design is, that's understandable because many of you might not have encountered it yet. But it's one of the most important things in VC. So it basically means the curriculum for English in Year 12. And this year it's actually changed, or actually for next year it will change. And then it remains the same for a couple of years. So what the Year 12s are doing now is actually very different to what you guys will be doing in 2, 3, 4 years' time. So it's very important that you have different goals to work towards, maybe compared to your older brothers and sisters, because what they're doing is not going to be the same. We're going to look at something called the mentor texts unit as well, which I think is going to be a particularly useful one for those of you who are currently enrolled at Topscope, or if you would like to get more experience, you can enroll at Topscope. And basically how the programs kind of can help you work towards that. And a lot of you who like reading will love to hear about that. And if you love writing, then you'll love this as well. Key strategies preparing for 11 and 12 while you are still in junior middle school. So that's something I'll go through. And also, if anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, you're more than welcome to use the chat. So if you want to leave your question in the chat, and I'll either I'll probably go through the questions at the end. So we will have a little bit of time if you guys have any questions or if anything is unclear. We're going to look at some key differences and strategies for high achieving students and targeted editing and refinement. So for those of you who really want to know the specifics of what makes a good essay, we'll go through that too. Let's get started. So I won't go through too much through this. This is just a little introduction Olivia gave before. So pretty much the same thing, teaching for quite a while, currently teaching VCE. We'll move on to the next part of the presentation. So let's have a look. So compared to some of you who've done, maybe you have older siblings who are doing or have done VCE recently, there are quite a few big differences. So the biggest difference from 2023 and 2024, so if you're in year 10 right now, this is especially relevant to you, is the crafting texts unit. So what crafting texts actually refers to is basically a unit. You may be familiar with the creative unit. So basically English in VC is split up into three main areas of study. So there's the analysis, argument analysis, which is your persuasive, text response, which is when you read books or watch movies and you do your TL essays about them. And the third one was called creative. So now it's actually called crafting texts. So basically, with this unit, it's basically looking at your ability to write a variety of texts. So the curriculum, so the assessors previously thought, it's good to have creative, but there needs to be a little bit more of a focus on other types of texts too, because you might think, okay, but what's the point of doing this type of essay or this type of text if I'm not going to do it in VCE, which is easy to fall into. But now let's have a look through what this means. So basically, in year 11 and 12, you'll be expected to look at a range of texts, not just stories, not just movies. You'll be looking at things like it says here, if we have a look. So short stories, speeches, monologues, podcasts, poetry, songs, memoirs, biographies, and then you're going to need to use them to write your own. For example, your teacher might give you a biography as a mentor text, and then inspired by that, you will have to write your own piece based on it. So a mentor text is a text your teacher gives you, and then you do a response to it, either a personal response, which is going to be like, it's a little bit like an essay, but it's writing about your personal connection, response to the text. I'm sure your teacher will explain it a bit better once you get to it because it's still very new, or writing your own. So you need to be prepared not just to write one kind of creative, but any of these could come up. And on the final exam, there's a set amount of texts. It's also looking like crafting texts will be on the exam too. So there you go. I'll go through this a little bit more. So what that means, sorry, I'm just going to move my window so I can see it a bit better. So students read and engage imaginatively and critically with mentor texts. So guided reading of mentor texts, you're going to be spending time in class reading a variety of texts, developing an understanding of them, their vocab, the structure, the features and ideas. And then you're going to look at purpose, context, and how these, how does the audience influence and shape the writing? So this is all information that can be found on the study design. It's a big PDF document that if you just Google VCE English study design, it will come up. Make sure you're looking at the right one. So basically with this is something so for year 11, this is what the year 11 version of this will look like. So like I said, very important if you're currently in year 9 or 10 to start thinking about it. Let's look at what the year 12 version looks like. So the year 12 version is basically the same. So again, this is really important to those of you in year 10. So except there's actually 4 separate categories that the texts can be under called frameworks. So your school, when you're in year 12, the frameworks are like big ideas, and then you have to look at texts that fit within those ideas. The 4 categories are called writing about country, so writing about protest, writing about personal journeys, and writing about play. So 4 really interesting, really broad topics. So if you'll have a look here, you'll notice that there are some really big themes, right? So for writing about country, we're looking at experiences like farming, land management, expressions like country music, traditional understandings of country, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, explorations of place, belonging, local, international. They're big themes, right? And if you look at protest, some of you, if you don't keep up with the news, you may not really know very much about protest. You may not have learned much about historical protests unless you do history. But you very well could get something like this at your school. So you'll notice that they all expect you to have a very strong knowledge of some kind of real world context, real world issues. And they all have to do with something about personal identity, justice, personal journeys, so to do with emotions, our struggles, our challenges, and then play. Even play is a very interesting one, because play is another human aspect of, we're not just at conflict all the time, right? We are, as creatures, it's looking at how do we enjoy ourselves? What is play? Why do we do games, sport, acting, images, rules, rule breaking? So play is also a really fascinating one. I'm interested to see which schools will do that in 11 and 12. But yeah, so I know that quite a few schools have already settled on the first three. Play is a really, really fun, really interesting one. You have to see what your school will decide on. And you can already see maybe next year if you have a sibling in VCE. So basically, what you should start thinking about as well for this unit, because I know that a lot of schools, you're already doing persuasive language, you're already doing text response. This is new. So it really will pay for you. Start paying attention to current issues in the news. Start paying attention to your own feelings and responses to those issues. If you see something fascinating coming up and you think, oh, it's a really good book or a text about identity or country or your own experiences, just keep it in the back of your head for a little while, because you'll be expected to respond in a really sophisticated way. And it's actually very fun. Once you start seeing things that way, you'll make these connections, and it's just a really good unit, basically. So don't be scared, even though it seems like there's a lot here. Just keep it in the back of your mind, because I know none of you are in VC yet, I don't think. So there you go. Let's have a look at the next. So those are the changes for year 12 in 2024 and 25. So I think that the current study design I need to check is going to be at least for the next 4 years. So this will affect everyone who's currently in, I'd say, 7 to 8 so far. Let's keep moving. So we'll just quickly look at some examples of assessment. So how to break down the study design when you look at the study design. So with the study design, each area is broken down into the marks that you get for certain things. It's not quite a full rubric, but there is one available. It's so interesting. It's so good to know this. You have to know this. So for example, you'll see in the middle, it shows you how many marks are allocated to what for a particular outcome. This one is for mentor texts. So if you know what to put the most attention and effort into, it can really help you guide your goals as well. So for example, you might have to write an analytical response to text, a written text constructed in audience purpose context. I've highlighted some important words there. And you'll notice there it's got something to do with producing your own texts. That's kind of like creative. So for those who currently do top scope and you think, oh, but why should I write an interview for my year 9 homework? Or why should I be writing a biography? Why should I be writing this? Good news, any of those things could come up. And if you've got the preparation for it, it will make it 100 times easier. So if you're in year 7 to 10 and you haven't been doing your writing homework, do it. It's more relevant than ever now. So if you want to find out more about these, have a look at the study design. They're available online. Some of you might be doing EAL. I'm not sure if anyone is doing EAL, but you'll notice that it's very, very similar. So I thought I'd go through it. It's basically the same, except instead of doing a full essay for your personal response or your creative, you about your yeah, so you'll notice there's not a huge difference if you actually space you're still doing mentor texts, just when making your slightly less complicated. That's the new unit. To your team. Well, I just thought it's very for you to know that have a actually start preparing for this new unit. So start reading a wide range of texts early if you're not already. So that's your poetry, your newspapers, articles, scientific texts, information reports, short stories, etc. Take advantage of opportunities to write different texts whenever you can. I'm not sure how many of your schools will give you opportunities to do lots of these different types, but when you do, really try to get into it, learn it seriously. Don't just dismiss it as like, oh, I'm not going to do this in VCE, so I won't bother. Chances are you will. If you're at Top Scope, do your writing every week. This is one for all students, actually. Challenge yourself to read or annotate different types of texts regularly. Go to the library. You guys are luckier than ever. I look at your school libraries compared to when I was at school, and you have so many amazing books, so much amazing technology. Go there, choose something out of your comfort zone, something that you look at and go, oh, it doesn't interest me. Look at it anyway, read it, make it your little project for the week. Read a newspaper, get to school early, go to the library, read a newspaper, go read an encyclopedia, anything at all. It gets stuck in your brain, basically. The earlier you start, the better. So the more you read, the more you'll recognize, the better your vocab. That's a really big thing as well. And don't just rely on what you can find on the internet. That's a really big thing. Just because you can find it, it does not mean it's good quality. There's a lot on the internet that's really average in terms of its quality, vocab, and so on. And I say this to year 12 students. They say, oh, but I can find an example essay just on the internet. Okay, doesn't mean it's good. It means it's the same other essay thousands of other students are Googling, right? Or it's the same other text thousands of students are reading. Libraries have so much better information in terms of quality. I love libraries. So I just thought, keep it in mind. It's an excellent resource always, especially coming up to VC. Okay. Cool. So keep moving on. Just a little breakdown. So this is mainly relevant for those of you in 9 and 10. So basically, you're doing an argument analysis, a text response. So you're still studying those. Those remain basically the same. There's no comparative anymore. I'm not sure if that means anything to you guys, but that's a very, very big difference. There's no comparative. No comparative texts, no comparative articles. You analyze 1 or 2 texts and then 1 or 2 articles, not comparing them, just on their own. Makes it so much easier. The comparative text response is being replaced by creating texts, which is the new unit I just showed you. On the SAC and the exam, you will be examined on your ability to write a different type of creative text. Take it seriously. That's all I'm saying. Take the chance now, learn how to write creatively and properly, because it will be on the exam. Focus on your text response and argument skills. That stays the same. And TPEL or other TEAL structures are still really, really useful. So that's my advice in terms of that. And another thing that's actually come up a lot is AI. So when I went to a meeting of examiners and assessors earlier this year, this one came up as a concern. A lot of my friends who are teachers at schools currently also see AI. So a couple of things that you might be relevant to you. So schools are seeing more use of AI. It's very, very easy to see when a student has made AI written work. I won't tell you how, but it is extremely easy. Very, very, very easy to see when something's AI written. So don't try it. Don't try it. Focus on your own skills. They're focusing more on authentication now because of this. So basically, you will probably be asked to do more handwritten work, years of remote learning, doing things digitally. If you aren't very good at handwriting, get used to it. That's what I can suggest, because there'll be a lot of handwritten SACs, a lot of handwritten tasks, because that's one way to get around AI. Authenticated conditions as well. If you're thinking, oh, but I work so hard, I'm worried that someone else will just do an AI response and get the same mark as me, they won't. It's really easy to tell. And under SAC conditions reveal all, basically. I just think it's a good note to remember, because this is something you probably have seen friends or teachers, or someone has probably mentioned AI to you, chat GPT, or other things as well. Don't try it for school assessments. It can be used in some ways well, but we're still in the very early stages. Sometimes teachers may find a way to use it that works for you. It's not bad in itself, but its use needs to be very, very careful. You do not want to submit AI-generated work. If you get found out, it'll be plagiarism. So we'll keep moving. Okay, so I wanted to show you some examples actually of some student work. So let's have a look. So this is an example of middle upper year 11 students. So this was a student from, actually it says year 11. I actually think this was a student from the VCE beginner class last year, or very late. So we have a couple of classes at Topscope. There's year 10. If you're currently in year 10, we are opening a VCE beginner class, which is kind of like a transition to year 11, which teaches you some stuff about text response and persuasive skills. It's really, really good. I'll be teaching it at some point, so that's good. But this is an example of that kind of work. I won't read it line for line. You guys can, if you're curious. But this is a fairly middle upper written by a year 10 to 11 student. So you'll notice that there's some awkward phrasing. So Noors argues that humans have failed in history trying to create solutions to attract attention from politicians responsible for resolving issues, highlighting that protesting has not been an effective method in the past. This is a very common way for students to start when they're starting to explore more language in the senior school, and also just in middle, using a lot of words and not using many commas. That's one thing that you need to kind of work towards refining. So if we look at some uses of language, so there are some parts where I've highlighted, and I'll go through what some of my edits look like. Some of you might even be looking at this and thinking, gee, it sounds good though. So it might sound good at first glance, but this is what I'm talking about with quality, is that once you actually read into it like a teacher would, you'll notice what is missing and you'll notice how we assess. So a couple of things are highlighted here. Let's have a look at some of the corrections. So I'm just going to, oh, yeah. This is the corrected version. So if you thought it was pretty good, okay, this is how I thought it could be moving upwards. So notice the red words that I've put in, for example. So being more specific, so rather than saying in history people, I've replaced it with protesters. So protesters have historically failed to attract the attention of what kind of issues? Climate issues, emphasizing, using power verbs, strong verbs like emphasizing, and down the bottom as well, reinforce, hundreds of years. And then we've got some phrasing that I've fixed for this student, positioning the reader to believe that the issue will be solved more easily by government officials than by everyday protesters and civilians. If you're wondering what I've done here, I've made it much more specific. So if you have a look at that last sentence, implying the issue will be solved with more ease if it's looked in by government officials, okay, what issue? It's just like more, than everyday protesters and civilians, positioning the reader to believe that. It's these little changes in phrasing that a teacher sees and will encourage you to make edits to make it more specific. And also some edits to the left that I've included. Positioning the reader is a good phrase, and also just making sure you don't contradict yourself. So something here, the student has contradicted themselves. I've just edited it and fixed it. So I just thought that's a different, that's one way of looking at this type of response. Let's have a look at a different one. Now, this is a year 12 student. This is a year 12 student when they started with me at the start of the year, and they were already fairly good. So I think this was a upper middle essay. Some of you are looking at this and thinking, gee, that already is really good. And it is pretty good. But this student, their school standard is very high. So they wanted to keep improving. So the changes that I've made here, so I'm going to move to the edited version because this one's quite long. So again, it's about looking at things and basically looking at language more specifically. So for example, this student has said establishing a reflection. So a reflection, I've said, is not really a technique. It's more appeal and emotive language. For those of you who, I think all of you are doing persuasive language at school, this is my #1 piece of advice. Learn the techniques, learn the appeals. When your teachers give you that big sheet, it's like a big glossary with all the techniques on it. Please remember them. Actually try to remember them because it's impossible to remember 30, 40 different techniques once you get to year 12. So the earlier you start committing them to memory, the better. And you can really tell which students have committed them to memory because they're working at a much higher standard sooner than later. That's just my advice. My #1 advice for persuasive: learn all the techniques, commit them to memory, figure out how they work. So that's one thing I've said to this student. So changing some phrasing as well, establishing a clear image of Hapsey wetlands as a thriving environment, beloved and respected by residents, only threatened by urban development. So if we look at the red language as well, so changing again with, that's the other thing, it's learning to use connective words. So without the intervention of human development makes it more specific. The contrast between, that's a technique, which is contrast. Aims to elicit, strong verbs, positioning them to feel, using a cynical tone, emotional language, create a sense of distrust and doubt. Most of the changes I've made here are, it's really simple actually. Make it more specific and make the vocabulary clearer. Those are the two things. Know that, and also knowing the techniques. Those are my biggest hints for persuasive. Something else actually we'll go to that in a second, but something else as well. Remember that the unit is called argument analysis, not technique analysis. So you have to know the techniques, but you don't need to write a whole essay about every single technique in the piece. You're looking at overall argument. Just remember that for those of you who are currently doing it at school. I'll show you an example of another student as well, looking at text response. This is actually an EAL student, and this EAL student has scored very, very hardworking. They've scored very highly, A+ on all their SACs. And this is an example I've put in red here, not my corrections, but just some ways that this person has explained their points, basically. This is a very useful example for English and EAL students. I would say even if this was an English student, it's still an A+. This student has worked really, really well. So you'll notice some phrases here. If we look at this first example, symbolic depiction outlines how trauma propels him, reevaluate his actions, of being a bystander. These, you might think, how do I get that kind of vocab? How do I get that vocab? The answer is to read. Read quite a lot, read quality. Going on your phone and reading an article that is written for, a general audience will not give you all the vocab you need. That's why I'm saying you need to go to a library, read books, read complex texts, because what you read is where you'll absorb words from. If you're not reading hard texts, you will not absorb sophisticated language. Please remember that. So this student, for example, works very hard, can read. So this text that they're talking about is actually quite a difficult text as well, a very good one. Let's have a look at some more vocabulary. The growth in his comprehension of morality is demonstrated, underlining his final escape from the brutality of war. There is no doubt that warfare leads to inevitable damage in everyone's hearts, underlining the profound impact, and so on and so forth. So what the student has done well is also explaining their evidence. So I'll jump to another point here. So when you're doing a text response and your teacher says, use TEAL, evidence, explanation, link, These red sentences are explanation sentences. So it's very important that you're able to explain your ideas clearly, and that takes practice. For example, my partner, who's also a teacher, he's looking at his Year 9 essays at the moment, and they all are trying very, very hard. It takes refinement. So if you are in junior middle, keep trying. If you find a word that you think sounds great, write it down somewhere in hand. Make a little glossary at the back of your English book. That's a really, really useful hint. Any word you find useful. Symbolic, wow, that sounds good. Depiction, that sounds good. Write it down, make yourself a little glossary, and you'd be surprised. When you are in SAC conditions, it'll be up here. That's my advice as well. So vocab is a big thing. You can't learn vocab overnight. Keep practicing, try new things, do the best you can. And then when you get to Year 12, it'll be much easier. So keep moving. In comparison, so the creative unit, like I said, we don't do the creative unit from 2024 onwards, but this is an example of a creative from a lower student, so lower to middle range. So this particular student actually is a very, very good, but their weak point was the creative, because their school really didn't do much practice at all for creative writing. So let's actually take a look through this. So the main thing here that makes it a lower piece is the punctuation. So some of you might have a look through some of the dialogue. Dialogue is a very important one to know how to punctuate. So with creative writing and any kind of mentor texts, creating texts that you'll be doing, you need to understand punctuation and grammar. And you need to understand the structure of the texts. So for a story, for example, it follows certain structures. The grammar. So if we look at the dialogue, there's no punctuation inside the quote marks, is there? So after no, after plain, needs to be punctuation. Otherwise, it can look very unrefined. No matter how good this story is, because of the punctuation, it brings it down. So please keep that in mind. It doesn't matter how incredible your ideas are. If your punctuation makes it very hard to read, it will bring you down. Another thing as well is that you might not get much explicit instruction in story writing and construction. If that's the case at your school, because like I said, a lot of schools in the past just kind of go, oh, we'll teach to VCE rather than we'll teach to general writing. They can't do that anymore with the new text unit. So even if you're not even if you don't like reading that much, even if you don't like writing stories, try to understand what makes a good story. And every time you write one or consume a story, TV shows are good. When you watch a movie, when you read through something that has a story or a plot that really engages you, I want you to think about why. And then that can help, that will kind of bolster for you. So if you write a story where, so anything more? So basically with creative writing, this would have picked it up to not a perfect range, because this student's response, obviously I can't write a response for them. The suggestions that they took were the ones that they took, and so on. But just bear in mind, so creative writing is something you need to learn to understand. You can do that not just through reading. Reading's the best form, but also through watching movies, television, and so on. Okay. Compared to, so this is an example of an A+ creative. And this student initially started with So their marks were definitely not an A when they started this unit. I'd say they were closer to a C+ to a B. But together we refined, and they wrote this by themselves as well. So I didn't take any editing on this. This is their own version that they wrote. They wrote 3 different stories. They refined it over time. This is their final, and they got an A+ for their creative sack. So you'll notice that there is a strong use of adjectives. Those of you who I've taught before will remember me saying these same things. So adjectives: burning sensation of warmth, slowly melting away the icy coldness, warmth, heartening, fascinating, sweet citrusy aroma. Sensory writing is very effective for this piece. This was for a text called Flames by Robbie Arnott, which is about it's about Australia. It's an Australian text. It's set in Tasmania. The punctuation is accurate. So you'll notice that's another thing. This student knows how to use complex punctuation like hyphens, semicolons as well. Complex punctuation, it makes a huge, huge, huge difference. Basically, think of it this way. When you learn to use difficult punctuation, when you learn difficult vocabulary or sophisticated vocabulary, what that actually does, it gives you a new way to express your ideas. It is literally not possible to express particular ideas without having the vocab and the punctuation for it. So that's why, even though it seems challenging, you need to keep working towards that, because your ideas will improve, your expression will improve. Something else here as well is sentence length and punctuation. There are short sentences, there are long sentences. That is another very, very effective thing, no matter what type of writing you're doing. And compared to the previous example, language is used accurately with an intentional end goal. That's really important as well. It's an end goal. If you know what your goal is, it might be to improve particular vocab, to write more effective sentences. You need to be intentional. Don't just go into writing something to see what will happen, because it won't be as, sometimes you can do that, but most of the time, if you want to intentionally improve, you actually have to figure one thing out you want to do. It's intentional. In this case, they had a prompt. They wanted to make a story about the bark god, which is an imaginary god that lives in gum trees in Tasmania, and they did it. So it's very effective. So I'll give you some more hints as well. And these probably are pretty similar. So I'd imagine that your school rubrics are based off the VCAR ones. Even when you're in year 8, 9, 10, these are still used as a sample rubric by a lot of middle school teachers. So statistically, most students get a 6 or a 7 on the exam. So 6 and 7 is the median mark. Most students, I can't remember the exact percentage, I think that it might be around 70% of students, probably more, fit into either a 6 or a 7. So you'll notice that they're fairly similar. I'm imagining a lot of you are aiming for an 8, a 9, or a 10. The 9s and 10s are the students who have read regularly, they try hard, they read their texts. I'm going to say read a lot. They learn punctuation, they take feedback, and they really engage with ideas. It's not just about saying the same thing 10 other people have said, it's about their own engagement with a text. That's what makes a 10. So at least from the students that I know have taught, got 49, 50 as well. To get a perfect 50, that's the kind of work that has to go into it. Or even just getting a 40+, whatever your goal is. Read your text multiple times. You need to create an original understanding, and you can't achieve that just by reading summaries and sample essays. You must read your book. That seems really basic. It's just like you don't go out and play a game of sport without stretching beforehand. You don't go out and you don't play an instrument without checking that the instrument actually has strings on it, right? It's just that kind of thing. It just seems so basic that you need to do it. Read the book if you want to do the text response. That's my advice. Have a look at the qualities of a 9 and 10 as well. So a 7 or an 8, a 6 or a 7, it says adequate and clear. Whereas for a 9 or a 10, it says close and perceptive, exploring complexities. For 7 and 6 and 7, understands the topic. But you're not just aiming to understand the topic. You guys are aiming to do more than that. Understand the implications. Explore its complexity. So complexity is a very big word that comes up. Developing if you look at 6, a generally organized piece of writing. You guys should be aiming higher than that. You don't want a teacher to be describing your work as generally organized, right? So aim high is what I can tell you, right? So a 6 or a 7, that's most students will be there, but you have the potential to kind of keep trying a bit harder, even if you feel like right now you're not doing that well. Look at the descriptors: cogent, controlled, well substantiated, detailed, coherent, fluently. These are all things that you can aim for very easily because you guys are starting early. You're not in VCE yet. So set your goal up high. Don't just try to make your work generally organized. Try to make it better, right? That's just something I want you to be aware of. This is where criteria can help. So rubrics can help because it breaks it down to a comparison that is much easier to understand than just what is good, you know? Looking at argument analysis, we're going to have a brief look at this too. So again, if you look at a 6, adequate, clear for 7, thoughtful for 8, and perceptive for 9 to 10. So it's a more simple rubric because it's got less involved. Changing the words as well. So demonstrates some awareness, insight, sound insight, and sophisticated insight into the ways in which written and visual language is used to persuade. So again, I won't go through this one too much. Should be fairly obvious if you've done persuasive language analysis at school. I think that the most useful thing that you can do since you're starting early, read the news every day. When you read an article or when you see an advertisement, if you're using, just for fun, you might be using social media. You look at a TikTok, you see an advertisement. You go on Instagram, you see an advertisement. You read a news article about an issue and it evokes some kind of emotional reaction in you. I want you to quiz yourself why, because that's exactly what you have to do for argument analysis. Think about, what does this picture do or say? What is it about this image that makes me want to buy a product? What is it about this news article that makes me think, gee, that politician's a horrible person, or gee, that politician's doing a great job? It's all got to do with language and visuals. So that's just something really quick every day. If you practice your it's called media literacy. So if you practice your media literacy skills, that will, honestly, it's the exact same thing, and it just makes things much better for you. There you go. That's what I would suggest. Read the news, understand why you are persuaded by certain things, understand why advertisements work on you or don't work on you. That's what I would suggest. Develop those skills. And in terms of writing, again, remember the techniques. Start learning the techniques. Okay. So now that's done, I'm going to quickly go through some high achievement strategies. This is probably what you're mostly here for. So if you're in year 9 and 10, so read plenty and read often. Oh, sorry, just one second, guys. I just need to exit my little screen for a sec. There we go. Okay, cool. So if you're in year 9 or 10, read plenty and read often. Use any chances to write essays as a chance to improve, and aim high. Every single one of you, I don't know all of you, but you need to remember you're not aiming for adequate. You're aiming for, even if you're adequate now, that's good because it means you can be really good later with work. So aim high. Don't just dismiss yourself as not good at English. There's no point. You know, you've still got heaps of time. Use it. Start learning the vocab. That takes the longest, and techniques. Read watch your texts early. So if you're going into year 11 next year, do it on the holidays. There is no time during the year in year 12 to read a whole book. Do it on the holidays. Save yourself a lot of effort. Use your spare time effectively. This is what I suggest to students too. So if you do struggle with reading, you could even listen to an audiobook in the car. If you take a train to school, put some headphones in, listen to your audiobook for 10, 20 minutes while you're doing something else, or just listen to it. Read in the car, maybe do, there are even vocab, even stuff like Wordle, if you guys have Wordle, crosswords, just in like those little times that you have while you're waiting. So instead of scrolling through your phone or looking at videos, just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, do something useful. Get an ebook on your phone. When you feel tempted to scroll, read the book on your phone instead. Do some revision. Do a virtual crossword. Do a Wordle. Learn some new words. Seriously, it makes a very big difference, and it will train your brain to kind of preoccupy itself better as well. That's what I would suggest. Read the study design and VCAR documents. Do this for all your subjects, not just English. No matter what you're doing, read the study design once you get into year 11 and 12. Time management is a super important one. Get yourself a planner. Find your SAC schedules as soon as possible, or at least a rough outline. There's no break between topics. So there's also so basically you also need to do an oral presentation for year 12. And I'm bringing this up now because it's known for being the shortest unit. In fact, one of my students, his school is telling him to do it on the holidays, and then they present week 1. They're not spending any class time at all on the oral presentation. So this is an example of sometimes your school will tell you to do an activity that will be assessed, but you'll need to fit it into the rest. And the oral presentation is one of them. None of the kids I'm working with have more than 2 weeks to prepare for it. And it is still assessed. What I'm trying to say, manage your time. Know what is due and when, so you are not caught off guard. Make sure you do mixed practice. So don't just type. I have a student who writes excellently when he types, but is not actually fast enough to finish an essay, or like to finish, still did very, very, very well for what it's worth, but could have done just that little bit better if he'd finished his essay. Do mixed practice under timed conditions. Time management skills, this is similar to above. Know what you need to do, break it into small parts, give yourself time to do it with no distractions. Break the big tasks into small ones. That's my biggest suggestion as well. Tutors offer specific advice for a reason. It's important to listen to them and find time to implement them. Basically, if you are getting help, really try to understand where that teacher or tutor is coming from. Ask questions if you're not sure. We're all really happy to answer or happy to offer suggestions. Yeah, and basically, so for those of you who are at Top Scope, or maybe not at Top Scope, and you're kind of wondering about how the VCE programs work and how they help you. So basically, we have a couple of VCE programs. We have VCE Beginner, which is a transition from year 10 to 11. So if you're in year 10 at school at the moment, starts halfway through the year, where we start looking at the types of writing, we start getting into persuasive and text analysis. Year 11 class is similar, but we'll have to see how it's running. Sometimes it's also running as a one-on-one class, which is also really helpful for current year 11 students. I think currently it's running as a one-on-one class. So you bring your schoolwork, we can help you with it. And if you want extra extension, we can offer that as well. And same with year 12. So year 12 is a small group structure, working one-on-one. And yeah, so it's basically like getting a one-on-one lesson, but you've got 2 hours. So it's you work with other kids, you get to see what other people are working on. Fabulous opportunity. So with the VC classes, we can also offer extra resources, vocab lists, sample essays, materials, specific feedback. So I love giving specific feedback. All my students know that. I hope you use it. So that's a benefit too. Sometimes your teacher might not always have an opportunity to do that. We can give you a bit of extra help. You can ask questions you're unsure of, or if you want to know how to extend work further, we'll keep you on track as well. I'm keeping all my kids on track. Maintaining work to a high standard, preparing in advance, breaking complex assessments down. help you to understand what to expect with an assessment. That's a big deal too. And all the teachers here are qualified, experienced. I've taught VC, the other VC teachers have taught for a while, long time, and broad knowledge of curriculum. That's just something I thought I'd mention, because I do know that I recognize a lot of you. I know that a lot of you are going into middle senior school, so I think it'll be very helpful. Okay, so I can't believe it's nearly 8 o'clock. So I was just going to see if anyone had any questions that they might like to ask. I can see, I'll just click the chat to see if there is one. I think, yeah, so that's a good question, Keshav. So hi, Keshav, it's good to see you again. So it's very likely that for VCE, year 12, they're handwritten. So all my students currently are doing handwritten SACs. So if you're getting used to doing online ones, I think some schools may do them online, but now because of AI, I imagine that almost all of them are going to be transitioning to handwritten just for that reason. And all of my current students are doing them all handwritten. So that's what I would say. Prepare for handwritten, basically. The lockdown was an anomaly, so any online stuff they're going to cycle out. And yeah, if anyone had any particular questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat before we finish up. Or if you remember something afterwards, you can also send us an email. We'll forward it to me. I'm always happy to answer questions. I love talking about English, so that's me. But otherwise, I'm happy to pass it back to Olivia for now.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think, all of the knowledge you just delivered tonight is quite valuable, especially you just pointed out several very important points, such as time management skills. As my opinion, I was thinking about when the students come into year 11, year 12, time management skills is not a problem at all. But until remember last SEC, the first SEC this year for year 12, we mentioned about one of year 12 students who has done really good in the class. But when he started in writing for the first SEC, he just totally run off the time. And sadly that he didn't receive very top level SEC as he expected. But his ability definitely reached to the super top levels. So time management skills is quite essential for everyone to practice from now on, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Especially with that particular student as well, it was handwriting. So very, very good at writing online. But when it comes to action, because handwriting takes a lot longer, you'd be surprised. I think a lot of us would be shocked at an hour of handwriting. You can do so much less than with typing, but you need to know that. You need to be aware of it. So it's about managing your time by doing timed practices, and handwriting work as well for your SAC. So it's knowing how long it takes you, then working with that to improve the amount of time it takes you to do certain assessments. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely to know this point. And I noticed that the other very good point to remind our students is maybe intentionally practice, especially for vocabulary building up. Yeah, I think that's quite essential for not only the secondary level students, but for junior level students as well.
Yeah, it's very important for everyone. Intentional, that is the biggest word. It's like if you try to study something, but you just kind of vaguely take in bits and pieces because you think, oh, I'm going to study, and you actually just read the whole time. It's not intentional. You're not actually, it's the same with any subject, but English particularly people take for granted because we see it around everywhere. So we assume we're just going to take it in and learn it. You have to be intentional with it. And also I can see Keshav, you have a question as well, which is a very good question. What's the difference between literature and English language? Oh, where do I go into? This might actually be relevant to quite a few of you. So English is the mainstream kind of one that I've spoken about today. Literature is focusing on, so you don't do persuasive at all in literature. Literature is where you focus on texts, their construction. The texts are more difficult generally in literature. So literature is looking at texts through like a social perspective. You use frameworks to look at texts from an ideas perspective. So basically it's very, very much about ideas and analyzing the ideas in a text, the construction. Like I said, the texts are harder, but if, you'll do things like Shakespeare, you'll do more plays, you'll do scripts, a lot of stories, classic novels as well, you do in literature. So it's a fantastic, fabulous subject if you love the ideas and text response part of English. English language is completely different. English language, a lot of students are shocked, is actually what we would call linguistics. So if you're interested in English language, they should just call it linguistics, in my opinion, because what linguistics is you're looking at the construction. So you're looking at the sounds of language, the history of English as a language, the things, what are called the subsystems. So phonology, which is the sounds, syntax, which is sentence structure, semantics, what makes a word mean a word. It's like a technical analysis of English, completely different. So it's technical. It is really, really, really fun. I love language, but it is 100 times more to remember. So if you want a subject where you just remember a lot and do an analysis based on remembering information, it's more of a science, in my opinion. It kind of reminds me a lot more of something like biology or another science where you just remember and then apply that knowledge. Would you recommend English or literature for someone strong in English for purely marks? Purely marks, I would probably go for English, because English is more, if you're already doing well in English, maintain doing well in English. Literature, I think you need to have a real passion for, really be interested in it. If you love reading and if you really love ideas and you want to challenge yourself, do that, because it's amazing. It's an experience, basically. It's more looking at English as an art rather than looking at English for practical purposes. But for purely marks, English is probably just the best way to go. How much does EAL scale up? I'm not 100% sure how much EAL scales this year, because it does change slightly every year. I don't imagine the scaling will be massive, though. I don't think that EAL...
I may just take turns about this question.
Yeah, please do. I'm not
read
up to date with it.
roughly in the morning today about if you receive 30 as raw marks from EAL, it will scale down 2 marks. Yeah,
Okay.
basically, it's scaled down a little bit, such as English. If you got raw marks 30, it will scale down 1 mark. But if you receive 40, then, or 40 plus, it won't scale down.
Yeah, thank you very much for answering that question. So unfortunately, because every single student does some variation of English or EAL, it either doesn't get scaled or it gets scaled down 1 or 2 points. Whereas if you get a mark, I think it's usually above 35 to 40, somewhere in that range, then it will not get scaled. English doesn't get scaled up at all because all students do it or some variation of it. English language and literature sometimes do get scaled up because they are more difficult. So yeah, just bear that in mind. But if you are in doubt, literature and language are very specific subjects. I think either you love them or you hate them, to be honest. So you can try them in year 11. Please do. Please do if you're interested, because year 11, you do have the time still to go back to regular English. But yeah, if you're already strong in English and you're not particularly passionate about literature or language, just stay with English or just stay with EAL would be my advice. But yeah, very good questions. I'm glad that you guys have so many questions. Okay, but I might pass it back to Olivia because it is 8 o'clock.
Great. I think we have done enough information introduction today, and thank you for your time. And all of your comments and suggestions are very helpful, not only for the students, for me as well. Yeah. And thank you for everyone's time tonight, and looking forward to see you in the future at TopScope or somewhere else. But if you do have some questions, we're very happy to answer and discuss. Thank you for your time, Ms. Wright. Wish everyone have a good night.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone. If you see me around or if I teach you, you can also just ask me questions. I'm always happy to answer. Good luck with all your studies, and thank you, and good night, everyone. Oh, actually, Keshav has one more very quick question, if you can make it very quick.
Okay. All right. So some people do one subject, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in 1 year. I was just wondering, say you're doing 1 and 2 of an English subject, when would the tests be? Would it be like you do one in like one semester and then two in the second semester, or both in the
So
first?
do you mean for units, like doing units 1, 2, 3, and 4 in 1 year?
Like, because some subjects do units 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the same year. I was just wondering, do we do unit 1 in the first 2 terms, like the first semester? Or is it like you do unit 1 in term 1?
It's a very good question. I haven't encountered any students who've done English. I know that some other subjects, sometimes schools do that. I haven't encountered English, though, in terms of doing that. I don't think it's usually done, but if it were to be done, I imagine you'd do unit 1 in unit 1 and 2 in some. I don't know if they do it. I'm trying to think. If it does, I'm not sure how it would work. You'd have to ask your school because they would have. It's not something that I've encountered before with the students I've taught.
Yeah, so
Feel like,
Miss,
yep.
just what I was saying was, so 1, 2 is in year 11, right?
Yes, that's right.
My question was, is just the part 1 in the first semester, or is it like in the first term?
Yeah, okay. So I see your question. So unit 1 is semester 1, unit 2
Okay.
is semester 2.
And the tests are at the end of the semester?
Yes, that's right.
Cool. Thanks, Miss.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Olivia.
Sorry. That's all good. I might have misunderstood what you meant, but yeah, so unit 1, semester 1. So each unit is 1 semester of work. So 1, 2, then 3 and 4. Cool. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for contribution.
Yes, always happy to answer.
Yeah. And thank you for Kashif's contribution as well. Good questions. Yeah. All right, I'd say goodbye again to everyone. Have a lovely night and enjoy tomorrow for the school day.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.